Hello and welcome back to another episode of the St. Francis Youth Podcast, the podcast where we have a go at discussing the topics chosen by you. Welcome back to another episode. We are living in a distinctly chaotic and unsettled moment. First we had COVID-19, followed by lockdown, and now unrest about the racial tensions globally. In the States we had the tragic and unnecessary death of George Floyd as a policeman knelt down on his neck and ignored the man's cries for help as he told him over and over again that he couldn't breathe. This was a brutal and tragic death that has kick-started a global movement for justice. There have been George Floyds before. I know many of my black friends are feeling exhausted as they've been trying to get society to listen to them and take them seriously for a long time. But there seems to be something about this season where we are ready to listen. Perhaps it's because we finally stopped and made time to take these events and stories that surround them seriously. So today we get to hear from my friend Erina Sebuliba. Eleanor to her friends. I will be honest, I was hesitant to ask her to do this for a number of reasons. Firstly, there is loads that we could have discussed with her. From Marvel movies to Jesus, mental health to veganism or books. Eleanor is just great to have a conversation with about almost anything. I didn't want to just automatically discuss race with her because of the colour of her skin. Another reason I was hesitant was because it's not up to her as a black woman to educate me on race. That is ultimately my responsibility, and there are loads of resources available to help me do that, and we will point you to some of these during this podcast. That being said, I have been deeply grateful for my past conversations with Eleanor about race. It's something she's passionate about and informed about, and it was the central theme of her dissertation at uni. So I wasn't just asking her because of the colour of her skin, I was asking her because this is something that she's really insightful about and has often discussed with me. So when I discussed this podcast with her, she's very kindly agreed to it, and I hope that you find this conversation as helpful as I did. But just before we dive in, I just wanted to respond briefly to 2 points, which has a lot to do with why we're having this conversation. Firstly, some have asked, why are we talking about Black Lives Mattering? Don't all lives matter? And the answer to that is yes. It's exactly this reason that all lives matter, that we need to get on board to the message that Black Lives Matter. On Father's Day, I saw this great meme. It simply said, all parents matter. Can you imagine if I had written that in my Father's Day card? Hey Dad, remember, all parents matter, mate. Yes, all parents matter, but it's right to have a moment where we remember fathers. In the same way, it's right that we have a moment where we remember that Black lives matter as well. They are not saying that only Black lives matter. They are not saying that white lives don't matter. They're saying Black lives matter. A message needed in this particular moment of time, particularly in the wake of George Floyd. Another analogy that's been helpful is to think about a house that is on fire. Imagine my house is burning and I call up the fire brigade and I say, my house is on fire. And the response I get is, well, mate, all houses matter. That's not what I need. If my house is on fire, I need my house to matter more just for a moment. And again, I think that this is what we're getting at. The experience of black people at the moment is that their house is on fire. It's important that we listen and take seriously what is being said in this moment. The final thing I just want to respond to is the attitude that, well, George Floyd was American and this is ultimately an American problem. We're not racist over here. Well, again, we need to listen to and take seriously what is being said. And Eleanor is super insightful on this as she shares her own experiences and perspectives. But this kind of racism that we're talking about is systematic. So in other words, it's working behind the scenes, often unnoticed in our structures and traditions and industries. As white people, it is difficult for us to recognise this. And this is why it's so important that we listen. So here we go. Here's an opportunity for us to listen. Well, welcome, Erina. Thank you so much for joining us on the St. Francis Youth Podcast. Nearly forgot what it was called, but welcome. We've got some quick fire questions so we can get to know you a little bit, if that's all right. So, First one is, if you could eat food from one country for the rest of your life, what country would you go for?
So this is really hard because I love pizza, so Italian would be like ideal. But I got to stick to my roots and go with Ugandan food. If I like went home and couldn't eat anything that my mum had made, I think I'd insist Ugandan food straight up. Yeah.
Amazing. What's like the sort of highlight of Ugandan food?
I'm always here for the plantain, you know, like
Yes.
sweet and savoury, just in all forms. Like, yeah, plantain.
Good.
Yeah.
Good work. DC or Marvel?
Marvel, all the way.
Obviously.
Every time. Yeah.
Favorite Marvel movie?
I think I'm gonna have to go for Ragnarok. You know.
Yes. Good work.
Like it's up there.
It is. Oh my goodness. We watched Jojo Rabbit last night, which is the same director.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and say it. Videoed. Taika Waititi. It's something like that.
I think you nailed it.
That was close. That's right. I got it right. I can't prove any different. But yeah, that's a good film. Something that you're reading at the moment?
I am reading Why Love Matters. Don't know if this is backwards on the thing.
No, it's good.
Yeah, Why Love Matters. And it's by this lady called Sue. And she is just kind of talking about attachment in like early ages and like the importance of like those first relationships on how they affect our brain and how we relate to other people like later on in life. It's a good read.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, that links in nicely with a little bit about kind of your passion and what you studied has been psychology. Can you tell us a little bit about what you studied and where?
Yeah, so I studied psychology and counselling at the University of Roehampton. And that was like almost 2 years ago now. Crazy. But I know, an old lady. But yeah, because I'm just really passionate about like mental health and working with young people who struggle with mental health issues. And yeah.
Amazing. And you're working in that kind of environment at the moment. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, so up until like last month, I was a senior healthcare assistant at a mental health hospital. And so it was just working with like inpatient young people, so between the ages of like 12 to 18, who just need to spend some time in hospital to like work on their mental health, and just so that they can get to a point where they can feel safe enough to live in the community.
Amazing. Oh, thank you. And there's no way to kind of naturally link into this next question, but it's a popular one for St. Francis Youth. What is your favourite way to eat a potato?
Oh, it's gonna have to be chips all the way. But you know, like the chips that you get when you go to like a fish and chip shop.
Oh, like chunky ones.
Yeah, because the small ones can be done wrong, you know? Like they could be done wrong very easily. But if you get like a chunky one that's done wrong, it's basically mashed potato. And I'm okay with mashed potato, you know? It's like mashed potato with crispy bits. Yeah, exactly. Win-win.
Amazing. And what is your top tip for surviving lockdown?
I would honestly say going on safe walks, just going on a nice long walk and just being outside for a bit, even if it's just like, you know, instead of taking the bus to get your shopping, just walk all the way to the shop and get what you need to get. And just really helps. Clears the mind, get to like breathe in some fresh air. Yeah, that's my top tip.
So Eleanor, we met in Harrow. You were a young person in our youth group, and Harriet and I have had the privilege of being friends with you for a bit now as well. And so thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Can you tell us a little bit, before we sort of dive into the interview, just a little bit about how you came to faith?
Yeah, so I was raised in a Christian household, and I think, there were a few times in between where I kind of just like questioned things, but I was just so used to like, you know, living with Christian parents and having Christian siblings that I didn't question it a lot. And then when I was about 18 or so, which is when I started going to the youth group, really, I just kind of, I started to like read my Bible more, and I started to just read a lot of books and really, just confirmed my faith for myself. And then, I was confirmed by Paul. Well, with not by Paul,
By
but
the bishop.
yeah, by the bishop.
Jesus.
Like, yeah.
I was
But
there.
yeah, Paul did my confirmation lessons, and yeah, and then I kind of just been going since then.
Oh, amazing. And yeah, thank you for coming on, Eleanor. There's so much that we could have talked about, and I've been really excited because I just always find talking to you really interesting. We could have talked about Marvel or veganism or mental health,
Yeah.
but I know something that I've always been really encouraged about discussing with you has been this issue of race, which obviously is kind of, you know, a huge conversation at the moment, particularly. And I've been hesitant to ask you to have that conversation on the podcast. And one of the reasons is that I'm aware that it's not up to you as one of my black friends to inform me and tell me about this. Although, you know, you've always been really gracious and helpful when you have done. Thank you. But actually it's up to me to educate myself, and there's loads of resources. And I think I just want to say to all of our listeners and watchers that it's not up to Eleanor to inform and tell us everything, and it's going to be really useful to hear some of her experiences, but it's up to us to kind of sort of check our privilege and understand the issues. And it is complex and it is hard, but there's loads of resources, and we'll try and point you to some of those at the end of this. But Eleanor, thank you so much for graciously having this conversation with us, and I really appreciate it. And so really the first question is, you know, why are we talking about race? Because really, I guess some people would take the view that racism has been something that has been dealt with in the past. It's not really an issue at the moment. And therefore there's a lot of confusion, particularly in the wake of sort of George Floyd and others, about, well, isn't that just one individual? Surely we're past this. What's your experience been?
So that's a really good question. And I think a lot of people have that narrative of race and racism for lots of different reasons. Mostly because although racism in the overt sense, so slavery or segregation has kind of minimized over the last couple of years, what's really happened is that racism has just become more like covert. So it just means that it's not as obvious, it's not as explicit. And so really what's been happening is that racism has kind of like changed its face, and it's just harder for people to recognize. So it happens usually more in a systematic way, which is kind of what we've been seeing in the news. So I think, you know, there have been times when I've experienced like explicit racism, and just people saying, you know, racial slurs to me, or just not being particularly kind, and it obviously because of the color of my skin. But there've also just been times when, like, if I've been at work and, you know, sometimes like a customer, so I used to work in a shopping center, and sometimes customers would like actively avoid talking to me because they assumed that I didn't know what I was talking about, or they might assume that because they've got stereotypes in their mind about Black people either being lazy or being uneducated, and those people might not have considered themselves racist, and I probably wouldn't say that they are racist, but what's happening is that there's an element of prejudice that the stereotypes that they've kind of learnt about Black people, which can kind of come about in lots of different ways. So like through the media or just through conversations with other people, they've internalized that, and now they're kind of acting that out in everyday life. I'm just, sometimes, so I was a senior healthcare assistant for about a year and a half. And a lot of the time you'd walk in the room and people would just, you know, kind of ask someone who is white or not Black for advice or where they can find things, and kind of just look over me and assume that I don't know what is going on. Or if they're like, oh yeah, if you go talk to the senior healthcare assistant, she's in the office. And they would just talk to, you know, one of my white colleagues, assuming that I'm not the senior healthcare assistant, when in actual fact I am. And I think what happens is people and wonder, like, oh, that could have been about anything. That could have been for any reason. But in that moment, it's really, like, I can tell that that's not what's going on. Also, because if everyone in the room that they haven't met before is wearing a badge that says, wearing a badge that says senior healthcare assistant. There's no reason, you know, to assume that I, you know, wouldn't be the senior healthcare assistant other than, you know, the color of my skin. And it's obvious also because everyone else in the room was white. I'll just clarify that. So, and that's something that, yeah, can happen a lot and has happened a lot in, lots of different places that I've worked.
Yeah, wow. Goodness, thank you for sharing that. And so as you said, it's like it might not be that the intent is to be racist, but it's kind of there. I mean, do you have any sort of insights on why that might exist? Why that kind of that sort of unintentional racism might still be part of the way white people are?
Yeah, and I've had a lot of conversations like with my white friends about this. Actually kind of wrote my dissertation on this as well. And so what I think has happened, if we look back to the past where racism was just, again, very covert, very obvious, very explicit, that racism didn't just extended to the media as well. So if we use the media for as an example, we'd have things like the menstrual show, which was like overtly making fun of Black people. And I think that has continued in our media in like very sometimes not so subtle, but also subtle ways. And they would portray Black people in certain ways. So either being the really loud Black best friend that's quite aggressive and just really in your face, or just again like it's usually the Black best friend who is quite lazy or not as intelligent as their white counterpart. And then so even though you might watch those shows and think it's just a show, if you don't know any other people of color, if you don't know any other Black people that can change your perception, then you might watch that and take in that, this is what all Black people are like. And it wouldn't be something I think people do consciously. But if you've only ever experienced a tree on TV, you're going to assume that every tree that you see is going to look like the one, or is going to act in the way that the tree on TV does. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
that was
absolutely.
A poor analogy, but so I think that's
great. I like that you went to a tree of all the things.
I love trees. But I think that's one way that happens. So then people take their experience and understanding that they've got from the media, and they like subconsciously apply that to life, and they kind of reenact that, and they might treat people a certain way based on that.
Would we maybe call that an unconscious bias? Is that the right sort of terminology for it? So it's something that has kind of penetrated our thinking and sort of influenced the way we see in the world, but because that has influenced us, we're not really aware of it ourselves. I mean, this is getting practical maybe too early, but cause I would still love to hear kind of a bit more of your experiences, but how can we become more aware of our unconscious biases and kind of the way that the media has affected us?
I think there are so many books out there. There are just so many books that talk about this, and that's actually how I learned about it, because we touched on things like this at university, like very briefly, but one of the reasons I kind of came to understand this unconscious bias was by reading Renee Edo-Lodge's book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. And that kind of just, helped me to understand like how other people think about race, and even how I think about race. Because, if so the representation of Black people in the media, yes, I grew up with lots of other Black people because my whole family is Black, and, and I grew up in quite a diverse area. But again, if the Black people that I'm seeing on TV are, my main, like my main experience of, of like, say, older Black women, because I've got like 6 older brothers, so it's like, so then I would kind of internalize that and be like, oh, so, older Black women are this or like that, or are perceived to be that way, so therefore I think I should act that way, and so reading that book really helped me to acknowledge that I had some unconscious biases about Black people myself, and how I've internalized certain things about myself. yeah, so I would say reading is really, it's just like one of the best things you can do. And yeah, just listening to other Black people's experiences. I think that can be incredibly hard because um, on the one hand, like you said, it's not every Black person's responsibility to educate you on racism and how difficult racism is to experience. But at the same time, I think when you come with an open heart and an open mind, and you're willing to listen about someone's experience and not do it in a way that's like challenging what they've experienced. Yeah, I think if you go into conversations with other Black people not thinking that it is your right to know their experience and it is your right to have this conversation, and just acknowledge how difficult it can be as well to talk about, difficult experiences of racism, because they are actually quite hard. And they're, even though I might say, yeah, like it's something, I've been Black my whole life, so, and racism isn't new, as I've said. So it's not something that really surprises me, or like I feel particularly shocked by a lot of the time. But it is not an enjoyable experience, and it's not something I always like to talk about. So I think, yeah, just being mindful and going into conversations with other Black people to hear about their experiences and learn where they struggle in certain areas can be really helpful. Yeah, I think a lot of people are talking about diverse and accurate representation in the media, because you can have like a diverse cast, or you can have, even in books as well, you can have like a diverse character list. But it's also, is the representation accurate? Because what we have seen happening again up until very recently is that, yeah, there are more Black people on TV, or there are more Latino people on TV, but at the same time, is that representation helpful? Is it accurate? Or are you just cast typing them? So are you just making them play the exact same roles, like, the villain, or like, again, the angry Black friend? Or are they the maid? Are they, if they're Asian, are they the geek or the boffin or whatever? And I think so acknowledging that that is also an issue, and it's not just having more people of color on screen or in books, but it's also, are their representations accurate? Are you talking about, like, are there representations about their own life experiences as well? And like, who is telling their story? Is it another white person telling a Black person's story? Or are you more diversity in the writing room as well? When we have better representation, like a kind of across the board, that challenges the negative representations of the past. And yeah, it kind of just opens up more of like more opportunities to have actual conversations about people's experiences. And I think that's something that you can do at home as well. Like, I know it sounds strange, but if you're watching TV and you see that, you see a Black character, or a character who's like a person of color, and you kind of know that and I think if you really start to watch films or TV with an intentional eye, you can kind of see the same characters coming up over and over again. And then when you see it, challenge it, and just in your mind challenge it to yourself, and just be like, actually, I see that this character here is like very similar to one I watched in another movie, like, and just, try and challenge that unconscious bias, and just see areas in your life where you might actually apply your expectations or stereotypes to other people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so helpful, because I think so often diversity is seen as a tick box, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah.
we've got our Black person tick, we've got a, do you know what I mean? And it's,
Yeah.
but what you're saying actually is it goes deeper than that. It's actually what we're allowing everyone to have in the room is dignity. We're allowing them to be their own character and their own person, not just a tick box exercise. And that requires, and I don't know about you, but my impression of the Black Lives Matters movement has been that it's been an exercise in listening. That's really what's being asked, is that actually stories are listened to, and that people are heard, rather than assumptions made about Black people, which might, I don't know if that's true. That's just been my impression, but I don't know if there's anything else you'd want to add to that.
Yeah, Yeah, so no, I do think that's true to an extent. I think so the Black Lives Matter movement isn't something that's new, you know. I think it's received a lot of attention in the media, like very recently, obviously, because of what's happened to George Floyd, which is very sad, but also you know, the fact that this attention has like kind of come about is also been really good for the movement, because it has kind of stopped people and like made them listen away. And I think that is kind of what the Black Lives Matter movement is about. I think it's about saying, you know, not saying that all lives don't matter, that, you know, other people's lives aren't important, but Black lives are the ones that are in danger at the moment, and just getting people to stop and acknowledge that, because, you know, it's majority of the time it is Black people that are being killed by the police. Majority of the time it is Black people that are being unfairly discriminated in the law system, and in almost every system. You know, racism can be overtly and covertly systematic, and it runs in a lot of our places in society. So yeah, I think it is kind of getting people to listen, and just listen to Black people and saying like, okay, this thing that is happening is really unfair. Can you please tell me like how is this affecting you? How can I stop this? How can I challenge it? How can I support you? Rather than just saying, is this like, okay, you're saying Black Lives Matter, is this really happening or what? Because we're seeing that it is. We're seeing that, you know, this discrimination is happening, and it is affecting people's lives. People are losing their lives, as they have been for many years. But yeah, just I think it's about kind of waking people up more to what's been going on, and yeah, encouraging them to actually take action in lots of different ways. I think racism is really difficult, and it's really uncomfortable for me and for other Black people. But I can also acknowledge that having conversations about race is uncomfortable and it's difficult, especially if you feel that you are not racist, or, you know, you have not been doing anything intentionally. So to hear someone say, actually, your way of life is actually really impacting me, and your privilege is actually really making me, and it's kind of hard to fathom how, you know, how you just living your life has done that and has contributed to such a horrible thing. So I can respect that that is really difficult. It is really difficult to have conversations about race. But ultimately, again, people's lives are being impacted by racism. And so even if you feel like you're not necessarily contributing to that, sometimes I think, if you don't mind me saying as well, especially as Christians, putting each other first, putting other people first, and just saying, you know, I don't get it, but I'm gonna listen to you, and I'm gonna love you, and yeah, let's have a conversation about this, even if it is uncomfortable.
So the Black Lives Matters movement has obviously really kicked off the last few weeks, and since, I guess, the last month or so, since George Floyd's really tragic death. My question is, there's been George Floyd's before, and, you know, this is not a new thing. We're not just we are suddenly waking up, but that shouldn't have been the case. Like, we should have reacted the way we have now, perhaps years and years ago.
Yeah.
What do you think it is about this particular cultural moment that has meant the conditions are right for us to actually stop and listen?
Yeah.
If you think we actually have, you know, maybe part of my worry, the same with coronavirus, right, is that coronavirus has taught us a lot, and we're like, wow, life needs to be different when we get back to whatever normal looks like. My worry is that we'll just get back and everything will be the same.
Yeah.
And my worry also about, there's two questions. My worry also about Black Lives Matters is that we make a huge amount of noise for a few weeks, and then it goes back to normal again, and actually voices are unheard, and petitions are not signed, and books are left unread, or I just wonder if you could maybe speak into that, particularly about this moment, and why. I wonder if you had any thoughts on why it's ripe.
That is definitely my worry also, because I've thought about that a lot as well, particularly, like, I don't know, I'm sure you do remember, actually, you know, the 2016 riots in London, about the police killing of Mark Duggan, and yeah, I thought about that a lot recently because everyone's been quite shocked by the riots going on, like not the riots, sorry, they weren't riots at all, but the protests going on in America and and here as well. Um, and I think what's happened is, if I'm being really honest, what I feel like has happened is people have more time, people have slowed down, and people have, yeah, they've got less places that they can and actually are allowed to go, and they're spending more time like listening to the news to keep safe, um, and in that, yeah, people have kind of just gotten their priorities straight a little bit. And I think there is a risk that, yeah, this could be trending, and that is really sad. But I think the attention that it has got at this moment in time is also really important and really powerful. And I think, yeah, even if it might be a trend overall, as individuals, we can all choose to make it not a trend in our lives, and to make our awareness of racism and prejudice something that we look at every day and we kind of acknowledge every day. I think what right now what's happened is that, one, as usual, Black people are kind of continuing, because even though, yeah, like it might not have had that much attention when, like, yeah, Breonna Taylor was killed by the police, and that kind of went quiet in the media after a while, but the Black community didn't really stop, challenging that and protesting about that, even if it wasn't as explicitly as has been over the last couple of months or weeks. But I think, yeah, that there is a risk that the killing of George Floyd will quieten down. People won't be as invested in making a change. If we just keep the awareness that, and what we've learned over the last couple of months and weeks, like in our minds and at the forefront of our minds, then yeah, we can actually make a difference. It seems daunting and it seems really difficult and uncomfortable, but if we just stop paying attention just because the rest of the world is paying attention, the problem isn't going to go anywhere. um, and yeah, we have the ability and the capacity to change that. Young people have the ability and the capacity to change that. Like, their voices are so powerful, and they, like, even though it doesn't feel like it, like, you guys own social media, like, you make the difference. So if we all keep kind of, even if it's having little conversations with our parents and our friends and just teachers as well, just asking for things to be more diverse at school, or having like a more diverse curriculum, that can make all the difference. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I know that's been really amazing to hear some of your experiences. I know there's so much more we could talk about as well. Are there any other resources or things that you would recommend?
The Bible.
We should talk about the Bible.
Yeah, the Bible. I think there are so many, like, it's, I think we can read the Bible just like, you open it up and you read a verse and you're like, oh, this is what we're talking about on Sunday. But one really helpful thing Paul always taught me is to, like, understand the context, understand the passage itself. And, racism and racial issues were still a thing back then, and I think Jesus talks a lot about how we should be loving each other and how we should not be loving each other. And I think, that the Bible is universal, and it's like never ending is the wrong word, but it doesn't age, in the sense that, like, it applies to any time. So, look through Proverbs for wisdom when you don't really know how to talk to people about things. Read Revelation as well, because there's lots of great stuff about what the kingdom of heaven actually will look like, and that can really challenge some of the things that we might think about racism and race, and how our world is actually going. And if we are trying to live in a way that we're trying to bring God's kingdom to earth, then we should kind of read about what it looks like first and then work towards that. And yeah, so the Bible is a great resource. It's, it should be your go-to place.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, kind of that wider context, that wider story is of God uniting a diverse people. That it's every nation, every colour, every tongue, every tribe, a part of his family. It's not that we all become one race or we become one colour. There's unity, but there's also diversity within that unity. That's kind of the picture that it's unity, not uniformity, is also talked about. And
yeah.
so, yes, we're one family, we're going to have a lot of similarities, yet we're going to appreciate each other's diversity and celebrate that, I think, as well. I can't wait to kind of see that picture of the kingdom of heaven that is just so rich and diverse. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's going to be cool. Eleanor, thank you so much. That has been amazing. I've realised that I've called you Eleanor the whole way through this interview. So that's going to create some confusion, but I might just leave it hanging, let people just wonder what on earth is going on there.
Yeah. I mean,
Sorry.
It's just, it's okay, when you've reached a certain level, then you get to call me Eleanor. Let's just put it that way, Be a mystery.
Wow. So, Erina, thank you so much for having come on.
That's all good. It was my pleasure. It was fun.
It's been good.